I became homeless after 10 years for revealing my husband's secret to his mother-in-law, and I never imagined that one conversation could completely shatter my life. I grew up in Texas, where I learned to value loyalty and family above all else, and I carried those lessons into my marriage. For 10 years, I believed I had built a life filled with trust, stability, and love. My husband seemed dependable, the kind of man who never raised his voice and always smiled at family gatherings. Our home was modest but comfortable, filled with the sounds of our children playing and the warmth of holidays spent together. On the surface, everything appeared normal, even enviable, to friends and relatives who visited us regularly. From the beginning, my mother-in-law and I shared a cordial relationship. She was a strong, imposing woman with a sharp mind and a deep sense of control over the family. I admired her at first because she had built a life from nothing, and she had every right to be proud. Over the years, however, she revealed parts of her personality that were more manipulative than nurturing. Despite that, I maintained a careful distance and always treated her with respect, knowing that my marriage depended on keeping her trust. My husband was the reason I stayed committed. He had a gentle charm that made it easy to overlook the subtle inconsistencies I sometimes noticed in his behavior. There were late nights he claimed were work, unexplained expenses in our joint account, and a tense avoidance whenever certain topics came up around family. I never questioned him outright because I wanted to trust him, and I believed that our shared life was built on honesty. Over time, these small doubts lingered quietly in the back of my mind. I felt them tugging at my intuition, whispering that something was not quite right, but I dismissed them in favor of maintaining harmony. The secret I eventually discovered was more devastating than anything I could have imagined. It was the kind of truth that shakes the foundation of a marriage and forces you to reconsider every memory, every shared moment, and every act of trust. For 10 years, I carried the knowledge silently, afraid of what revealing it would do to our family, to my children, and to myself. The burden was immense, a weight pressing on my chest constantly, growing heavier with each passing year. I became hyper-aware of my words, measured my tone around both my husband and his mother, and avoided any discussion that might inadvertently hint at what I knew. Each day the secret loomed over me, shaping decisions and constraining my freedom until it became impossible to continue hiding it. The revelation came at a moment when I could no longer protect myself from the guilt and fear that had accumulated. The decision to finally speak the truth to my mother-in-law was agonizing. I knew the potential consequences. The possibility of my husband reacting with anger, the shattering of family bonds, and the risk of losing everything we had built over the past decade. But I also knew that carrying this secret any longer would continue to corrode my spirit. I needed to reclaim my voice and my sense of integrity, even if it came at a personal cost. After I revealed the secret to my mother-in-law, the atmosphere in our home changed immediately. It was as if a heavy, invisible curtain had dropped over everything I had once taken for granted. My husband, who had always projected calm and control, transformed in an instant. The subtle tensions I had sensed over the years erupted into something raw and dangerous. The moment I had feared for a decade had finally arrived, and I was fully exposed to its consequences. I tried to maintain my composure, reminding myself that I had done what was necessary. Honesty, no matter how painful, was the only way to protect my moral integrity. Yet as the words sank in, the reality of what I had done became undeniable. My husband's eyes darkened, a storm forming in them that I had never seen before. The man I had trusted completely was now someone I could barely recognize. Fear surged through me, mingling with the adrenaline that kept my voice steady. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, was silent at first, her expression unreadable, as though she were calculating the consequences of this revelation for everyone involved. For 10 years, I'd carried this secret like a heavy stone in my chest, a burden that I believed I bore for love and loyalty. I had shielded my husband from the truth, believing that protecting him was an act of devotion. But the cost of that silence had grown steadily over time, leaving me emotionally exhausted and morally conflicted. Every decision I made in those years had been influenced by the need to conceal the truth. And now the dam had broken. The days following the revelation were tense and disorienting. My husband barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words carried a venom that was entirely new. Our home, once a haven, felt like a trap. I had anticipated resistance or anger from my mother-in-law, but I had not expected the depth of my husband's fury. Each interaction with him was a delicate dance, requiring constant vigilance to avoid triggering another eruption. I felt as though I were walking on a thin sheet of ice, never knowing when it might crack and plunge me into danger. Despite the fear, I also experienced a strange sense of relief. The secret that had haunted me for a decade was finally out in the open. The burden of secrecy, the endless mental calculations, and the gnawing guilt no longer had the power to dominate my thoughts. For the first time in years, I could breathe without weighing every word I spoke against the possibility of exposing myself. But this freedom came at a high cost, a cost I had yet to fully understand. My mother-in-law's reaction was complex. She was visibly upset, but there was also a measured quality to her anger. She was frustrated by my decision to reveal the truth, yet part of her seemed to recognize that the secret could no longer be contained. Her silence was almost more frightening than her words might have been, a reminder that she wielded influence over my husband and that the family dynamics were about to shift irreversibly. I realized that I had not only upset my husband, but had also disrupted the delicate balance of control my mother-in-law had maintained for years. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because revealing my husband's secret to his mother cost me everything. I understood that my choice was a gamble with the highest stakes possible. My home, my marriage, and my place within the family were all on the line, and I had no guarantee of safety or understanding. The moral necessity to speak the truth had overridden fear, but the reality of the consequences was beginning to settle around me like a heavy fog. In retrospect, the secrecy had shaped every aspect of my life over the past 10 years. My routines, conversations, and even moments of joy were tinged with the knowledge of the hidden truth. I had lived in a state of constant tension, carefully curating what I said and how I behaved to protect my husband from the fallout of his own actions. Yet even as I carried this heavy burden, I had believed I was doing the right thing. I had convinced myself that loyalty required a silence, that love meant protecting those we care about from harm, even at our own expense. Now, however, I could see that this silence had only delayed the inevitable. By holding on to the secret, I had allowed the tension to build, creating a pressure cooker situation that would erupt the moment the truth was revealed. The choice to speak up was terrifying, but the longer I had waited, the more dangerous the eventual confrontation had become. I had reached a point where the moral imperative outweighed the fear, and I had acted in what I believed was the only way to reclaim my integrity. Even as I prepared for the immediate fallout, I also had to consider the long-term consequences. Revealing the secret was not a simple act. It was a catalyst that would affect every relationship and every aspect of my life. I had to anticipate not only my husband's reaction, but also the ripple effects throughout the family. The home that had once felt safe now seemed fragile, and every interaction was charged with tension and uncertainty. I had set in motion a chain of events that I could not control, and I had to brace myself for the reality that my life was about to be irrevocably changed. I became homeless after 10 years for revealing my husband's secret to his mother-in-law. That moment, which I had thought might bring relief, instead shattered my life completely. I grew up in Texas, where loyalty to family and long-held promises were values that were spoken about often and lived quietly. I carried those values into my marriage. For 10 years, I had believed that I had created a life that balanced love, trust, and family obligations. I had built a home, raised children, shared quiet nights, and celebrated holidays surrounded by relatives. Everything seemed ordinary, even perfect, from the outside. Friends and family would say that my marriage was stable, that I was lucky, that I had the kind of husband many people only dreamed of. And for a long time I believed it too. My husband was calm, intelligent, and on the surface, dependable. He never raised his voice, rarely showed anger, and always had a polite word ready for anyone who entered our home. He was the man I had married because he seemed kind, rational, and unshakable. Over the years, I thought that reliability was one of his greatest virtues. Yet as time passed, subtle inconsistencies began to appear. Late nights, supposedly spent at work, unexplained withdrawals from our joint accounts, a tension in his tone when certain subjects came up in family conversations. I noticed them, of course, but I dismissed them. I wanted to trust him. I wanted our marriage to be what I had imagined. My mother-in-law, a formidable woman, lived nearby. She was smart, exacting, and commanding in a way that made her presence felt the moment she entered a room. At first, I respected her. She had built a life from nothing, raised her children with determination, and earned the admiration of many. Over time, however, her personality revealed layers of control and manipulation. She had a way of guiding conversations, of influencing her son without ever seeming harsh. I always kept my distance, knowing that my marriage required careful navigation around her authority. I treated her with respect and caution, believing that this balance was essential for peace in the household. Even though my husband projected calmness, small cracks in his demeanor hinted at hidden truths. There were glances that lingered too long at a private document, a sudden change in tone if a family member asked questions about money or work, a shadow of frustration when discussing extended family obligations. These subtleties, at first so easy to ignore, became more noticeable over time. I told myself they were normal, that everyone had quirks and that my imagination was exaggerating them. But deep down, I knew that something was off, something that I did not yet have the courage, or perhaps the proof, to confront. The secret I discovered was unimaginable in its weight and complexity. It was a truth that had been hidden from everyone, a truth that shaped not just my husband's life, but also the very structure of our family. For 10 years, I carried it silently, a constant gnawing presence in my mind and heart. Every decision I made, every word I spoke, had to be measured. The secret was so devastating that revealing it could destroy lives, fracture family bonds, and change the course of our children's upbringing. Yet keeping it locked away meant living under a constant, suffocating weight. Each passing year made it heavier. Every smile I shared, every evening I spent tucking our children into bed, was touched by the fear that this hidden truth might one day come out. Despite the burden, I maintained the appearance of normalcy. Our home was tidy, filled with the laughter of children and the hum of domestic life. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and milestones like any other family. Guests would compliment the warmth of our house and the harmony of our family. They had no idea of the tension that underlined every interaction, the unspoken vigilance that colored my every movement. I had become adept at lying by omission, answering questions without revealing too much, steering conversations away from dangerous territory, and carrying the weight of truth silently in my chest. Every time I thought about telling someone, fear gripped me. The secret had the power to unravel everything. I worried about my husband's reaction, the potential anger, and the hurt that might be inflicted on our children. I worried about the response of my mother-in-law, whose influence over my husband was profound. Most of all, I worried about myself, whether I would survive the consequences of finally speaking. For a decade, I had mastered silence, and I had convinced myself that silence was protection. It was safer to guard the truth than to expose it. But each year that passed made the pressure harder to bear, until I reached a point where silence was no longer sustainable. The moment of revelation came after a particularly tense week. I had stumbled across a document that confirmed the secret beyond doubt. It was one of those moments where time seems to slow. I remember the texture of the paper, the weight of it in my hands, and the racing of my heart as the truth settled into my mind. This evidence made it impossible to ignore what I already suspected. For 10 years, I had been balancing on a tightrope, knowing that any misstep could be catastrophic. The evidence made the rope waver, and I knew I had to act. I prepared mentally for the conversation with my mother-in-law. I had rehearsed it in my head countless times, imagining her expressions, the possible anger, the shock. I considered the worst-case scenarios, knowing that once the secret was revealed, nothing could be undone. I reminded myself that honesty was my only path forward. Keeping the truth hidden any longer would have been a betrayal of my own moral code and would have continued to erode my sense of self. The days leading up to the disclosure were filled with anxiety. My stomach churned, my sleep was restless, and every interaction with my husband carried an undercurrent of tension. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because revealing my husband's secret to his mother cost me everything. This moment was not just about truth, it was about reclaiming my life, even if it meant stepping into unknown danger. I had to weigh the fear of immediate backlash against the moral imperative to no longer live in silent complicity. I had to trust that speaking the truth would not destroy me completely, even though a small, insistent voice in my mind warned me that nothing would ever be the same again. On the day I decided to speak, I remember walking through the familiar halls of our home, noting the sunlight streaming through the windows, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the ordinary objects that suddenly seemed surreal. Each step felt heavy with anticipation. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced them to remain steady. I wanted to appear calm, confident, and rational, even as a storm of fear raged inside me. The moment I entered the room where my mother-in-law waited, I felt the full weight of 10 years press against my chest. The conversation that followed would change everything. When I began speaking, I was deliberate and measured. I recounted the details with clarity, omitting nothing that could later be questioned or misconstrued. My mother-in-law's initial reaction was silence, a blank stare that was impossible to read. I could feel the tension in the air thickening, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. My husband, who had been nearby, shifted uncomfortably, his face paling as he sensed the gravity of what I was revealing. The words I had held back for a decade finally left me, and the house seemed to close in around us, each heartbeat echoing like a drum. Even as I spoke, I understood the stakes. The secret had the potential to destroy my marriage, fracture family relationships, and alter the lives of our children. Yet I also recognized that withholding it any longer was impossible. 10 years of silence had been unbearable, and the moral weight of the truth demanded release. I braced myself for the fallout, knowing that my life, as I had known it, would never be the same. After the revelation, the atmosphere became electric with tension. The calm that had defined our home vanished. My husband's eyes, which had once radiated warmth and dependability, now held a storm of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger, and something darker that I could not name. My mother-in-law's silence was no less terrifying as she weighed the implications of the secret and the consequences of my disclosure. For the first time, I realized that the choices I had made in loyalty and secrecy had set in motion a chain of events beyond my control. Every detail of our life up to this point suddenly seemed fragile. The routines, conversations, and shared moments that had felt normal were now tinted with the reality of what had been hidden. The foundation of our family, built over a decade, appeared less stable than I had ever imagined. The security of our home, the trust of our children, and the stability I had fought to maintain were all at risk. The secret, once hidden, now demanded to be reckoned with, and the cost of honesty was becoming painfully clear. The moment my husband realized the secret I had carried for 10 years, everything changed. The air in our home felt suddenly heavy, as if it had been poisoned by the truth I had finally spoken aloud. The calm, familiar rhythm of our lives shattered instantly. My children, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation at first, sensed the sudden tension. They paused in their play, looking toward us with innocent curiosity, not yet understanding that the world they knew was shifting beneath their feet. My husband's reaction was immediate and violent. His face twisted with anger, and in that instant I felt the full force of betrayal. Not mine, but mine for speaking, his for believing he could control the narrative of his life. His hand gripped my throat with terrifying speed. I felt his fingers pressing, cutting off my breath, and I gasped, clawing at his grip. I could feel the power of 10 years of hidden anger and fear concentrated into that single act of violence. For a moment I wondered if he would let go or if this would be the end. Panic surged through me, replacing the months of careful planning and quiet endurance with raw, instinctive fear. I managed to pull away just enough to stagger back, my heart racing, my chest heaving, and my throat sore from the grip. The reality of what had just happened hit me like a freight train. This was no longer a private family matter or a conversation about long-held secrets. This was abuse, clear and undeniable. The man I had trusted with my life had crossed a line that could not be ignored. I realized with chilling clarity that my safety and the safety of my children were at risk, and that the life we had built over 10 years could not continue under these circumstances. Immediately, I took steps to document what had happened. I called my local emergency room, knowing that medical records would serve as proof of the physical violence. My hands trembled as I recounted the events to the triage nurse, careful to convey the urgency without exaggeration. The nurse understood, taking notes and examining me for any signs of injury, red marks on my neck, minor bruising on my arms, and the lingering pain from the strangulation. Every mark on my body became a symbol of the broken trust and the danger I had been living under. Once the medical evidence was secured, I contacted the police. I filed a formal report detailing the assault, recounting every motion, word, and gesture. The officer who took my statement listened carefully, confirming the importance of documentation and protective orders. The process was thorough, invasive, and emotionally exhausting, but it was necessary. Every question reminded me of the danger I had narrowly escaped, and the tenuous grip I still had on safety. I left the station with a temporary protective order, which offered a measure of security but did not erase the fear that had taken root in my mind. As the immediate crisis subsided, the long-term consequences began to emerge. My husband, furious and humiliated, sought to punish me in any way possible. He demanded that I leave the house immediately, using the revelation of the secret as justification for casting me out. The home we had shared for 10 years, filled with memories of holidays, birthdays, and quiet evenings, became a battleground. Each object, every photograph, and all the furniture I had once taken pride in were now symbols of a life that had been torn apart in hours. The very walls that had offered comfort became reminders of betrayal, anger, and danger. I gathered what I could carry, leaving behind possessions that held too much history to move in haste. The children stayed with a trusted relative for the night, their confusion and fear palpable. My heart ached, not only from the loss of the home, but from the trauma inflicted on the family unit. This was the beginning of homelessness, not as a choice, but as a consequence of the violent and unpredictable actions of someone I had once loved and trusted. With temporary safety secured, I began the meticulous process of building my legal case. I worked closely with domestic violence advocates, ensuring that every step was recorded, every document preserved, and every witness consulted. The medical report detailing the marks on my neck became the cornerstone of the legal argument. I collected testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed subtle patterns of control and intimidation over the years, documenting a history of emotional manipulation that had escalated into physical violence. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality that the assault was not a one-time lapse, but part of a pattern that justified protective action and legal intervention. Simultaneously, I prepared for the divorce proceedings. The revelation of the secret, combined with the documented assault, provided a strong foundation for filing on the grounds of abuse and irreconcilable differences. The legal team I assembled advised me on the importance of maintaining a clear record, demonstrating that the act of revealing the secret was an honest and morally justified decision, and that the violent reaction was the catalyst for the dissolution of the marriage. Each filing, every affidavit, and all communications had to be precise, leaving no room for my husband or his family to manipulate the narrative against me. The exposure of the secret to his mother added another layer of complexity. My mother-in-law's initial shock transformed into anger, not at her son for the actions he had taken, but at me for revealing what she had insisted must remain hidden. I anticipated some resistance, yet the intensity of her reaction surprised me. Phone calls became hostile, meetings tense, and every conversation seemed to escalate in emotion. I had to remain composed, knowing that any display of weakness could be used against me in the legal proceedings. My role shifted from wife to strategist, balancing the immediate safety of my children with the long-term objective of securing stability and justice. The emotional toll was immense. Nights were spent awake, worrying about the next move, analyzing every interaction, and anticipating every possible outcome. The fear of retaliation lingered constantly, yet I recognized that inaction was not an option. The secret, once a burden that weighed solely on me, had now become a weapon that could either protect or destroy, depending on how it was wielded. I had to harness it strategically, using truth as a shield, while navigating the unpredictable reactions of my husband and his family. The legal process stretched on for months. Protective orders had to be renewed, court dates attended, and evidence submitted repeatedly. Each interaction with the system was a reminder of the precariousness of my situation. My husband attempted to challenge the orders, citing the revelation of the secret as a provocation. I countered with a meticulously documented history of abuse, showing that the secret's revelation did not justify violence, and that his reaction was proof of his controlling and dangerous behavior. The courts recognized the validity of the evidence, yet the process was slow, draining, and emotionally taxing. Now this is where I decided to tell my mother-in-law the truth about her son, a decision that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong to make. It was not a moment of impulse, but a calculated step to ensure accountability. The confrontation was difficult, yet necessary. I presented the facts calmly, emphasizing the pattern of behavior that had led to the assault and the subsequent displacement of myself and my children. The mother-in-law's reaction was volatile, ranging from disbelief to outrage, but her acknowledgement of the secret ultimately strengthened my legal position. Her testimony would corroborate the timeline, the facts, and the sequence of events that documented the breakdown of trust, revealing the full scope of the consequences of my husband's actions. The process of establishing a permanent, safe living arrangement became another battle. Temporary shelters provided refuge, but they were not a substitute for stability. I had to negotiate with legal advocates, social services, and housing authorities to secure a home where my children and I could live without fear. Each application required documentation, each interview required a detailed account of the assault, and each approval reinforced the reality that my former life was no longer accessible. The home I had once called ours was lost, and the path to rebuilding would be long and fraught with challenges. Throughout this time, I also faced the psychological ramifications of both the assault and the loss of my home. Counseling sessions became vital, providing strategies for coping with trauma, establishing boundaries, and rebuilding confidence. The support of friends who understood the complexity of the situation was invaluable, yet even their empathy could not fully erase the pain of betrayal and displacement. Every step forward required immense effort, and every setback reminded me of the fragility of safety when trust is broken. The children, though young, sensed the upheaval. I worked diligently to maintain routines, provide reassurance, and foster a sense of normalcy. School became a sanctuary, a place where their lives could continue with some degree of stability. I balanced legal obligations, housing struggles, and emotional support, creating a fragile equilibrium that required constant vigilance. Each day was a testament to resilience, determination, and the necessity of confronting both the immediate threat and the long-term consequences of 10 years of secrecy and betrayal. Even as the legal and logistical battles raged on, I reflected on the moral implications of my decision. Revealing the secret was not only a catalyst for violence, but also a moral imperative. The years of hidden truths had eroded my sense of agency, and continuing to conceal the secret would have perpetuated a cycle of fear and manipulation. Speaking the truth was a conscious choice, a reclamation of autonomy in a situation that had long demanded silence. I accepted that the cost would be high, that the loss of my home and stability was an inevitable consequence, and that rebuilding would require courage, patience, and persistence. The day after the revelation, the air in the house remained thick and suffocating. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows could not penetrate the tension that had settled over every room. My husband avoided my gaze, but his anger simmered visibly in the rigid set of his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw, and the way he muttered under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening. Each small movement in the kitchen, each passing glance, felt like stepping into a minefield. I had to move cautiously, balancing the need to care for my children with the pressing fear that even a minor misstep could trigger another violent outburst. I spent hours reflecting on the choice to reveal the secret. The truth had been mine to bear alone for 10 years, a weight I carried silently, hoping it would never surface. I thought keeping it hidden was an act of protection for my husband, for our marriage, for the family stability I had worked so hard to maintain. But the cost of that silence had been immense. My health, my peace of mind, and my sense of self had eroded steadily under the constant stress of secrecy. Now, having spoken the truth, I realized that my safety had been jeopardized in ways I could never have predicted. The choking incident was a terrifying confirmation that the hidden truths had created a volatile and dangerous environment, and that the marriage I had invested so deeply in could no longer be salvaged without significant intervention. The secret itself had been devastating, a revelation that cut through the foundation of trust my marriage was built on. I had discovered that my husband had been hiding critical financial information from me for years, mismanaging funds, and making decisions that could have jeopardized our entire family's future. On top of that, there were deeper emotional betrayals. He had manipulated situations to maintain control over decisions that I believed were shared equally. Over time, these hidden acts created an imbalance that eroded my autonomy and planted seeds of fear I had learned to ignore. The moment I chose to reveal the truth, I broke the fragile illusion we had maintained, but I also lit a fuse that resulted in the immediate and terrifying act of violence. After the choking incident, I realized the importance of creating a meticulous record of everything. I documented the marks on my neck, noting their exact location, size, and color. I photographed them carefully, ensuring that they could serve as irrefutable evidence of the assault. Every bruise, every small abrasion became a symbol of the violation and a tool for my future legal protection. I could feel a mix of anger, fear, and determination building within me. This documentation was not just about justice. It was about reclaiming control in a life that had been dominated by secrecy and manipulation for far too long. Contacting the authorities was a pivotal step, though it came with its own challenges. I had to recount the event in detail, reliving the fear and physical pain, while knowing that every word would become part of the official record. The police officer who took my statement listened attentively, confirming that the assault was severe enough to warrant both immediate action and long-term protective measures. The temporary restraining order that followed provided some relief, but it also confirmed the reality that my life had irrevocably changed. The home that had been my sanctuary was now a place of danger, and the legal system became a necessary shield against further harm. The escalation of conflict extended beyond the immediate act of violence. My husband's reaction to the revelation and the protective order was to intensify emotional and psychological pressure. He sought to control the narrative, attempting to turn friends, relatives, and even some neighbors against me. Phone calls became confrontational, text messages threatening, and each attempt to manipulate the situation reinforced the need for vigilance. I learned quickly that maintaining composure was essential. Any sign of fear or weakness could be twisted into evidence that I was unstable or overreacting, undermining the legal protections I was trying to secure. Parallel to the immediate safety concerns, the process of divorce became a complex dance. Filing for divorce under circumstances of domestic violence required precision, documentation, and strategic thinking. I worked with my legal team to present a comprehensive picture of the marriage, highlighting the pattern of controlling behavior, financial deception, and the ultimate act of physical assault. The secret that I had carried for a decade was not just relevant, it became central to demonstrating the context in which the violence occurred. The revelation was not a reckless choice, but a necessary act that illuminated the dangerous dynamics my husband had cultivated over the years. The fallout extended into my relationship with extended family, particularly my mother-in-law. I had debated for years whether to involve her, fearing that revealing the secret would shatter the delicate balance we had maintained. When I finally spoke to her, I chose a calm, methodical approach. I presented the facts without accusation, detailing the series of events that culminated in the assault. Her initial reaction was one of shock and disbelief, which quickly shifted into anger, not at her son, but at me for disclosing what she believed should have remained hidden. I anticipated this response, but the intensity of her reaction was nonetheless jarring. The confrontation was emotionally taxing, forcing me to maintain composure in the face of hostility while ensuring that the truth was documented and preserved for legal purposes. The combination of assault, financial secrecy, and familial backlash created a perfect storm that led directly to homelessness. My husband's insistence that I vacate the home, coupled with his efforts to undermine my credibility, left me with few options. Temporary shelters became a reality, not a choice. Each night spent in a new location reinforced the fragility of stability and the long-term impact of domestic violence. I learned to navigate the bureaucracies of housing authorities, social services, and legal advocates, each step requiring detailed documentation, patience, and persistence. The loss of a home was not just a logistical challenge, it was a profound emotional blow. Every familiar space, every room filled with memories, became a symbol of loss, forcing me to confront the full consequences of both revealing the secret and surviving the immediate violence. Throughout this period, the role of documentation and evidence could not be overstated. Each interaction, each legal filing, and each meeting with advocates or social workers required careful preparation. I maintained logs of phone calls, collected affidavits from neighbors and friends, and kept meticulous records of any threat or intimidation from my husband. These steps were not just precautionary, they were essential for building a robust case that could withstand scrutiny in court. Every piece of evidence became a tool for survival, a way to assert control over a life that had been dominated by secrecy and manipulation for too long. The children's experience was another layer of complexity. Their lives were upended suddenly, and I had to navigate the challenge of providing emotional stability while ensuring their safety. School became a sanctuary where routines continued, and friends offered a semblance of normalcy. I balanced court dates, housing logistics, and emotional support, each day a testament to resilience and the necessity of confronting both the immediate and long-term consequences of 10 years of hidden truths. Now this is where I decided to tell my mother-in-law the truth about her son, a decision that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong to make. It was a calculated choice made to protect myself and my children, to ensure that the entire context of the assault was fully understood by someone who could corroborate the events. Her acknowledgement of the secret and the subsequent validation of the assault were critical in strengthening my legal position. Her testimony, when combined with medical documentation, police reports, and a detailed history of controlling behavior, created an unassailable narrative that supported the protective measures I had requested and laid the groundwork for the divorce proceedings. Each court appearance reinforced the dual nature of the conflict, the immediate threat of violence, and the long-term implications of betrayal and secrecy. My legal team advised me on the importance of demonstrating not only the act of choking, but also the broader context of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. The secret I revealed became a lens through which the entire marriage was examined, proving that my actions were necessary and justified. The combination of immediate evidence and historical context created a compelling argument for protective measures, custody arrangements, and financial settlements. The psychological toll of this extended conflict was immense. Sleep was often impossible, replaced by anxious vigilance and careful planning. Counseling sessions provided strategies for coping, but the emotional weight of 10 years of secrecy and the immediate trauma of violence could not be fully erased. Each day required strength, resilience, and the ability to compartmentalize fear, anger, and grief while continuing to fight for legal recognition of my rights and safety. I navigated housing challenges simultaneously, applying for long-term solutions while maintaining temporary refuge. Every application demanded documentation, every interview required detailed accounts, and every decision carried the weight of ensuring safety for myself and my children. The fragility of stability was constant, yet I pressed on, recognizing that inaction was not an option. The combination of legal action, advocacy, and personal resilience became the cornerstone of survival. The hours following the revelation of my husband's secret were the first real moments I had to process the reality of my situation. For 10 years, I had held the truth in silence, believing that keeping it hidden was a form of protection. I thought it shielded the family, preserved stability, and kept my children safe. I had become a silent observer of a life I did not fully control, carefully choosing when to speak and when to remain quiet. Each day of secrecy built pressure within me, an unspoken weight that grew heavier with every decision I made. I had seen the signs of manipulation, the subtle ways my husband maintained dominance in our home, and I had absorbed it, rationalizing that revealing the truth might destroy everything we had built. The moment I told my mother-in-law, the house seemed to shrink around me. The walls no longer felt like protection. They felt like witnesses to a decision that could no longer be undone. The reaction was immediate. My husband's face changed from the calm I had once known to something unrecognizable, rage, hurt, and betrayal. He moved toward me with sudden aggression. His hand grabbed my throat before I could react. The force was enough to cut off my breath, and the fear was paralyzing. In that instant, I understood the full weight of the danger I had invited into my life. The secret I had carried for 10 years had not been a burden in isolation. It had become a catalyst for immediate violence, a trigger for a side of my husband I had only glimpsed in moments of tension and control. The physical act of choking was terrifying and disorienting. My body reacted instinctively, my mind screaming with adrenaline and panic. I clawed at his hands, attempting to break free, but the strength of his grip was alarming. The fear was compounded by disbelief. I had never imagined that revealing a truth meant to protect him and our marriage could provoke such violence. When he finally released me, I collapsed onto the couch, trembling, my throat raw, and my heart racing. The silence that followed was suffocating. I realized immediately that my life and the lives of my children could no longer remain in the same space as a person capable of such violence. After the incident, I knew the first step was survival and documentation. I carefully recorded the visible bruising, capturing photos from multiple angles to preserve evidence of the assault. Each mark became a testament to the violation I had endured and an essential tool in any legal proceedings I would need to pursue. My focus was on concrete actions, recording the truth, documenting injuries, and ensuring that I had irrefutable proof of the attack. The fear was still present, but it was now paired with a growing resolve. I understood that to protect myself, I needed to approach the situation strategically, not emotionally. Contacting law enforcement was terrifying, yet necessary. I described the events in precise detail, recounting the hours leading up to the assault, the act itself, and the immediate aftermath. The officer who took my report treated the situation seriously, emphasizing that the choking constituted assault and that I had every right to pursue immediate protective measures. Filing for a temporary restraining order provided an initial layer of security, but it also underscored the reality that my home, which had been a place of safety, could no longer be trusted. Each legal step brought both relief and a deeper understanding of the magnitude of what I had unleashed. The aftermath extended beyond the immediate threat of violence. My husband's response to the protective order was to escalate emotionally, seeking to manipulate those around us. He contacted friends, relatives, and neighbors, attempting to cast doubt on my credibility. Text messages were threatening, veiled warnings filled with anger and disdain. I realized quickly that every interaction needed to be carefully recorded. Each phone call, each message, each visit had to be documented as evidence of a broader pattern of intimidation. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. This ongoing vigilance became a constant in my daily life, reinforcing the dangerous reality that the secret had not just provoked a single violent incident, it had exposed the underlying aggression and control that had always existed in the marriage. Simultaneously, I began preparing for the civil and familial consequences. Divorce was inevitable, but it was complicated by both the domestic violence and the 10-year secret. Filing required strategic documentation, presenting the assault, and weaving in the narrative of years of deception that ultimately led to the breakdown of the marriage. Each piece of evidence, medical records, witness statements, phone logs, and photographs, was critical in establishing a comprehensive picture of the toxic environment in which I had lived. The revelation of the secret was no longer a matter of personal conscience. It had become central to proving both the pattern of abuse and the necessity of protective action. My relationship with my mother-in-law became an equally delicate matter. Bringing her into the truth was a calculated decision. I carefully framed the revelation, focusing on facts and the timeline of events rather than accusations. Her initial reaction was shock, followed quickly by anger. She had been deceived as well, and the betrayal she felt toward both her son and me complicated the situation further. Despite the hostility, her eventual acknowledgement of the truth was instrumental in solidifying my legal position. Her perspective offered corroboration, giving weight to the claim that the violence and manipulation were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger, dangerous pattern. The secret itself was deeply tied to financial mismanagement and emotional deception. Over the 10 years of marriage, my husband had hidden significant financial liabilities and made decisions that threatened our family's stability. He had also manipulated situations to maintain control over critical household decisions, leaving me with a sense of disempowerment that I had internalized over time. Revealing the secret was both a moral and practical choice. It was necessary for safety, for financial clarity, and for ensuring that the children were protected from the consequences of hidden debts and mismanagement. The revelation was a catalyst that allowed me to confront these issues openly, but it also ignited the violent response that forced immediate protective action. The combination of assault and the exposure of the secret created a scenario where homelessness became a tangible risk. My husband's insistence that I leave the home, coupled with his attempts to undermine my credibility, made securing housing an urgent priority. I engaged with social services, housing authorities, and domestic violence advocacy organizations, learning to navigate bureaucratic systems that were simultaneously supportive and frustrating. Temporary shelters provided immediate safety but lacked stability, and the constant movement required meticulous planning to ensure that the children's routines and schooling were maintained. Each day was a negotiation of survival, combining logistical, emotional, and legal challenges into a single, exhausting effort. Documentation and evidence remained central throughout this process. Every step I took, every interaction I had, was recorded and preserved to support both the immediate protective measures and the broader divorce proceedings. Affidavits from friends and neighbors, records of threatening communications, medical reports, and detailed logs of the incident and surrounding behavior formed a comprehensive record that was critical in presenting my case in court. Each piece of evidence not only validated my immediate protective actions, but also created a foundation for long-term security and legal accountability. The children's well-being became a primary focus. They were exposed to a sudden upheaval in routine, to the loss of home, and to the emotional consequences of witnessing domestic violence. Maintaining their sense of stability required careful planning, coordination with schools, and creating a consistent support system despite the chaos. This was emotionally exhausting, but it reinforced the importance of the decisions I had made. The violence, the secret, and the fallout could not be ignored, and my actions were aimed at preserving safety and security for them above all else. Now this is where I decided to tell my mother-in-law the truth about her son, a decision that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong to make. This choice, fraught with risk, was necessary to ensure that someone outside the immediate conflict understood the context and gravity of the situation. Her eventual acknowledgement and corroboration became critical in both protective and divorce proceedings. It allowed the narrative of abuse, manipulation, and deception to be framed accurately in legal terms, and it helped ensure that the children's safety and my own legal standing were preserved. Throughout this period, the legal and emotional challenges were intertwined. Court appearances, legal filings, and protective orders required meticulous preparation. Counseling and support services were essential in managing the psychological toll. Housing instability added another layer of stress, requiring constant adjustment and planning. Every decision carried weight, every action had consequences, and every moment required balancing safety, emotional stability, and long-term legal strategy. The decision to finally reveal my husband's secret to his mother was not spontaneous. It was the result of years of quiet observation, sleepless nights, and a growing understanding that silence had not protected anyone. I had spent a decade balancing appearances, managing household responsibilities, raising children, and holding a secret that threatened the foundation of my marriage. Every day of deception weighed on me like a stone in my chest, yet the fear of what would happen if the truth was revealed had kept me silent. I lived with the knowledge that telling the truth could unleash consequences I could not control, but the moral and emotional burden became unbearable. For 10 years, the secret had shaped my life in ways I barely recognized. My husband had cultivated a careful, controlled facade. He was charming, patient in public, and seemingly devoted. But behind closed doors, I witnessed subtle manipulations, small acts of deceit, and moments of intimidation that hinted at the darker reality. I learned to navigate around his moods, to anticipate reactions, and to carefully word every sentence to avoid conflict. The secret itself was monumental. It involved financial mismanagement, hidden debts, and decisions that compromised our family's stability. I carried it silently, a heavy weight, believing it was a shield against disaster. The night I decided to speak, I prepared myself mentally, emotionally, and practically. I knew the risks and anticipated the reactions. I had rehearsed the words in my mind, carefully choosing the phrasing to convey truth without unnecessary provocation. The timing was deliberate. The children were safely occupied, the house was quiet, and I had ensured that there was an exit plan if things escalated. Despite all preparation, nothing could have truly readied me for what happened next. As I spoke, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The calm, controlled environment I had cultivated collapsed under the weight of my words. My husband's face changed from neutrality to disbelief, then anger, then a terrifying combination of rage and betrayal. The air between us thickened with tension. My breath caught, and I felt my body stiffen as I sensed the danger before it physically manifested. His reaction was immediate and violent. He grabbed my throat with force, choking me, cutting off my ability to breathe, and turning my living room into a space of terror. The shock and pain were overwhelming. I instinctively tried to pull away, clawing at his hands, but his grip was strong and unyielding. In those moments, time slowed. Every detail registered with terrifying clarity. The pressure of his hands, the constriction around my neck, the panic rising in my chest. I realized that the secret I had held for 10 years had transformed from a silent burden into a trigger for life-threatening violence. My mind raced as I struggled to stay conscious and regain control. When he finally released me, I collapsed onto the couch, trembling, gasping for air, and grappling with the reality of what had just occurred. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath loomed like a storm on the horizon. The first step after regaining my breath was survival and documentation. I carefully examined my body, noting the bruising and scratches left by the assault. Each mark was evidence, a visual record of the violence inflicted upon me. I photographed the injuries from multiple angles, ensuring that the documentation would be admissible in any legal proceedings. I understood that without proper evidence, my account could be questioned and my safety further compromised. These initial actions were carried out with trembling hands, but a clear understanding of their necessity. Seeking medical attention was the next critical step. At the hospital, I described the incident to the attending nurse and physician, focusing on the assault and the physical symptoms resulting from the choking. The medical professionals documented everything meticulously. Bruising, redness, and minor abrasions were all noted in official records. The medical documentation became a foundational piece of evidence, essential not only for establishing the occurrence of assault, but also for supporting the protective measures I would need in the immediate future. Each entry reinforced the reality that I had been a victim of a serious and dangerous act. Simultaneously, I contacted law enforcement to file a report. Describing the sequence of events in detail, I provided a narrative that included the context leading up to the assault, the act itself, and my immediate actions afterward. The officer listened attentively, validating the seriousness of the situation and explaining my rights. I learned that the choking qualified as assault and that I could pursue both protective orders and criminal charges if I chose. Filing for a temporary restraining order provided an initial layer of safety, legally prohibiting my husband from contacting or approaching me. It was a necessary measure that underscored the severity of the incident. The aftermath of the assault extended beyond immediate safety concerns. My husband reacted to the restraining order with a combination of manipulation and intimidation. He sent threatening text messages, attempted to influence friends and relatives, and even tried to sway neighbors by presenting a distorted version of events. Each action required meticulous documentation. I saved every message, recorded every interaction, and maintained a detailed log of incidents to protect myself and support future legal actions. The realization set in that the secret's revelation had not only triggered violence, but also exposed the broader patterns of control and intimidation that had been present throughout the marriage. The children's safety and well-being became an immediate priority. They had been unaware of the secret, and the violence introduced a sudden disruption in their lives. Maintaining a sense of stability required careful coordination with schools, child care providers, and supportive family members. I ensured that their routines were preserved as much as possible, and I explained the situation in age-appropriate ways to reduce fear and confusion. Their emotional health became a guiding factor in every decision I made, influencing housing arrangements, visitation schedules, and daily routines. Housing became a critical concern. The home, once a place of safety, was now associated with danger. I had to find temporary housing while legal proceedings were underway. I engaged with domestic violence shelters, social services, and housing authorities to secure safe accommodation for myself and the children. Each move was carefully planned, balancing accessibility to schools and work with the need for security. The instability was emotionally taxing, yet it underscored the urgency of my actions. Remaining in the marital home was no longer an option, and securing independent living was essential for both safety and legal credibility. Legal strategy became the backbone of my response. Filing for divorce required careful planning, integrating both the assault and the broader secret into the case. I worked with attorneys to compile documentation, including medical records, police reports, and evidence of financial and emotional manipulation. The secret, once a burden, became a critical component in establishing the pattern of deception and control. It allowed the court to understand the context of the assault, framing it as part of a broader history of abusive behavior rather than an isolated incident. This legal strategy was painstaking, requiring meticulous attention to detail and careful consideration of every potential consequence. Engaging with the mother-in-law was a critical component of the process. Revealing the truth to her was a calculated risk. Her initial response was anger and disbelief, but over time, her acknowledgement and willingness to corroborate my account became essential in both protective and divorce proceedings. Her perspective provided third-party validation of the patterns of manipulation and deceit that had characterized the marriage. It strengthened my legal position and underscored the necessity of my actions for the safety of myself and the children. Throughout the conflict, maintaining emotional stability was a constant challenge. Counseling, support groups, and personal reflection were essential in processing the trauma. I grappled with feelings of guilt, fear, and anxiety, balancing them against the imperative of survival and justice. Each day required careful management of emotional and practical responsibilities, from ensuring the children's welfare to navigating legal requirements and housing instability. The interplay of these factors created a daily environment of high stakes and relentless tension, requiring resilience and strategic thinking. Now, this is where I decided to tell my mother-in-law the truth about her son, a decision that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong to make. The revelation, fraught with risk, ultimately provided critical support in navigating the legal and protective measures necessary for survival. It allowed me to frame the narrative accurately in court, ensuring that the pattern of abuse and manipulation was recognized and addressed appropriately. Without this step, my ability to secure safety, legal protection, and eventual independence would have been significantly compromised. The legal proceedings extended over months, involving multiple court appearances, submissions of evidence, and testimonies from witnesses and family members. Each session required preparation and emotional fortitude as the husband sought to undermine credibility and retain control through intimidation. Every detail of the assault, every aspect of the secret, and every instance of manipulation was meticulously presented to the court. The documentation I had compiled, medical records, photographs, text messages, and witness statements, formed a comprehensive record that was difficult to dispute. The legal process, though exhausting, became a structured pathway to reclaiming safety and autonomy. Housing and financial security remained intertwined with legal actions. Securing independent living required navigating financial constraints, identifying safe locations, and ensuring that the children's needs were met. Social services and domestic violence advocacy organizations were instrumental in providing guidance, resources, and support. Each step required careful documentation and adherence to legal requirements, ensuring that my position remained strong and defensible in both civil and family court proceedings. The emotional toll of the conflict was profound. Balancing fear, anxiety, grief, and relief demanded constant attention. The children's reactions, the disruption of familiar routines, and the exposure to the broader family dynamics compounded the stress. Therapy and support networks provided critical outlets for processing trauma and maintaining resilience. Every day was a careful negotiation of survival, safety, and emotional stability, with the ultimate goal of creating a life free from abuse and manipulation. The days following the filing of legal papers felt surreal. The initial shock of the assault and revelation had passed, but it was replaced with a persistent tension. Every phone call, every knock at the door, every interaction carried potential risk. My husband's absence from the home was a relief, yet his presence lingered in the form of threats, messages, and an unpredictable pattern of intimidation. The temporary restraining order offered legal protection, but it could not erase the lingering fear that he could strike again. Living in this new, fragile sense of safety required constant vigilance. I moved into temporary housing provided by a domestic violence support network. It was modest, but for the first time in years, it was truly safe. I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. The children adjusted slowly, oscillating between relief and confusion, seeking answers for questions I could only partially provide. The disruption of routine, friends, and familiar surroundings was difficult, but it was a necessary step to ensure our safety. Each day became a careful balance of school, childcare, household management, and preparation for ongoing legal battles. The experience, while exhausting, reinforced the necessity of meticulous planning and perseverance. Legal proceedings advanced steadily. The divorce case became the primary focus, intertwining the assault charges, the secrets revelation, and the patterns of manipulation that had characterized the marriage. Each court date required careful preparation. I reviewed evidence repeatedly, ensured witness availability, and anticipated the husband's potential arguments and counterclaims. My attorneys guided me through the complex processes, emphasizing the importance of consistency and accuracy. The courtroom became both a battlefield and a place of refuge, where facts, documentation, and testimony could assert a reality that had been obscured for a decade. Witnesses played a crucial role in the proceedings. Family members, friends, and professionals who had observed the marriage's dynamics were called upon to testify. Each account reinforced the pattern of control, manipulation, and the ultimate violent reaction. The mother-in-law's testimony was pivotal. Initially skeptical, she had come to recognize the pattern of abuse and the necessity of corroborating my account. Her testimony provided a lens into the deeper context, validating both the assault and the underlying tensions caused by the husband's secret. This external verification strengthened the legal foundation, making the claims more difficult to dispute. The husband, in turn, attempted to undermine credibility at every opportunity. He portrayed me as overly dramatic, suggested exaggeration, and sought to present the assault as a minor or misinterpreted incident. Each attempt required careful rebuttal. Documentation of the injuries, messages, financial records, and witness statements became the shield against manipulation. The legal team emphasized precision, highlighting discrepancies in his claims and reinforcing the verifiable aspects of the case. This strategic focus ensured that the narrative presented in court remained consistent, credible, and compelling. Financial concerns became intertwined with legal actions. The secret I had revealed to the mother-in-law involved hidden debts and financial mismanagement that directly affected family assets. Using this information strategically, the attorneys argued that the husband's actions compromised not only personal safety, but also the economic stability of the household. The revelation of the secret, initially a source of fear and hesitation, became a key component in securing fair division of property, assets, and financial settlements. Each piece of documentation, bank statements, contracts, correspondence, served to substantiate the claims, reinforcing the necessity of transparency and thorough evidence. Housing and daily life gradually stabilized. The children adapted to the new environment, slowly finding comfort in a space where they could play, learn, and sleep without fear. I managed the household with a renewed sense of independence, balancing responsibilities while engaging in legal proceedings. Each day was a reminder of the cost of truth, but also of the liberation it provided. The stability of routine, the support from advocacy groups, and the accountability provided by legal measures allowed for a sense of controlled autonomy that had been absent during the years of secrecy and violence. Emotionally, the journey was far from linear. I experienced waves of grief, anger, fear, and relief. Processing the betrayal, assault, and the broader implications of revealing the secret required both professional support and personal reflection. Therapy sessions offered strategies for coping, emotional grounding, and planning for a future unburdened by manipulation. The children's emotional responses were intertwined with my own, requiring patience, empathy, and reassurance. Over time, moments of calm emerged, allowing for reflection on the past decade, the choices made, and the resilience that had carried us through the most dangerous periods. The husband's legal maneuvering continued, attempting to delay proceedings and maintain control. Each motion filed required careful attention, prompting additional evidence gathering and legal responses. Despite his efforts, the weight of documented facts, corroborating testimony, and medical records steadily reinforced my position. The legal system, while slow and at times frustrating, began to reflect the reality of the situation, validating the trauma and the necessity of protective measures. Every small victory in court provided a tangible step toward security, autonomy, and the dissolution of the harmful relationship. Rebuilding social and familial connections became an essential aspect of recovery. Friends, extended family, and support networks who had been distant or unaware of the situation began to provide support once the truth was confirmed. Reestablishing trust and redefining relationships required careful navigation. Boundaries were set, new communication norms established, and protective measures maintained to ensure that interactions did not compromise safety. The community became a stabilizing factor, offering both practical support and emotional validation during a period of intense vulnerability. The psychological burden of exposure, however, remained significant. The secret, once revealed, continued to influence perceptions, conversations, and the dynamics of family interactions. It required constant management, both legally and personally, anticipating potential retaliation, ensuring the children's safety, and maintaining clarity in all interactions necessitated vigilance. Despite these challenges, the process also provided opportunities for empowerment, reflection, and the cultivation of personal agency. Each strategic decision reinforced the importance of preparation, foresight, and a clear understanding of personal rights and protections. Eventually, the legal proceedings reached a point of culmination. The assault charge was recognized, and protective measures were extended and solidified. The divorce was granted, incorporating considerations of abuse, secrecy, and financial mismanagement. Custody arrangements prioritized the children's well-being and safety, and financial settlements reflected the impact of the husband's deceptive practices. The final judgments represented not only a legal resolution, but also a symbolic acknowledgement of the harm endured, the necessity of protective action, and the legitimacy of the decisions made under duress. The aftermath of the legal conclusion allowed for gradual rebuilding of life. Housing, finances, and routines stabilized, offering a platform for personal and familial recovery. Emotional healing continued. guided by therapy, reflection, and supportive relationships. The children adapted to the new normal, finding security and stability in routines, schooling, and social interactions. Each day represented a step forward, a reclamation of autonomy, and an assertion of the right to live free from manipulation and violence. Reflecting on the decade-long journey, the irony of the situation became apparent. The act of revealing the secret is intended to foster transparency and honesty, triggered immediate violence, disrupted the household, and led to homelessness. Yet it also catalyzed necessary protective actions, legal recognition, and eventual freedom from an abusive and deceptive environment. The experience underscored the complexity of truth, the risks inherent in disclosure, and the resilience required to navigate both immediate danger and long-term recovery. The balance between moral obligation and self-preservation became a defining element of the narrative, shaping every subsequent decision and action. Now, years after the events, life has regained a measure of stability. The children are thriving, the home is secure, and personal autonomy is reestablished. Memories of fear and betrayal remain, but they coexist with resilience, empowerment, and a reinforced understanding of personal boundaries and rights. The experience serves as a profound lesson in courage, strategic action, and the long-term benefits of confronting abuse, even when the immediate consequences are severe. The final weeks of legal proceedings were an emotional whirlwind. Every day brought a mixture of relief and dread, as I balanced the anticipation of closure with the persistent reminders of what had been lost. The house, once a home filled with comfort and routine, now felt like a distant memory. Every item, every corner, seemed to echo the years of secrecy and tension. Leaving it behind was not just a logistical challenge, but an emotional reckoning. Packing my belongings forced me to confront the tangible evidence of a decade of compromise, suppression, and silent endurance. Each piece of clothing, each photograph became a silent witness to years of unspoken truths and hidden struggles. Moving into temporary housing provided by a domestic support network was both a relief and a jolt. The space was modest, but it was my first safe environment, free from the immediate threat of the husband's presence. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, and the routines stripped down to essentials. Yet this minimalism brought clarity. For the first time in 10 years, I could breathe without fear, without strategizing every movement to avoid confrontation. The children, though initially confused and resistant to change, slowly began to adapt. Their laughter returned in small bursts, their curiosity resurfaced, and the home, though temporary, became a sanctuary for healing and rebuilding. Legal matters demanded relentless attention. The divorce proceedings intertwined with the assault case, making every detail critical. Each court date, each document submission, each testimony presented required meticulous preparation. My attorneys guided me through each step, emphasizing the importance of consistency, accuracy, and patience. Every motion filed by the husband to contest or delay proceedings needed a strategic response. The legal team emphasized the value of evidence. Photographs of bruises, copies of threatening messages, witness statements from friends and neighbors, and documentation of the secret's revelation. Each piece of evidence became a cornerstone of a case built not only on emotional turmoil but on undeniable facts. Witness testimony was particularly significant. Friends who had observed the subtle signs of tension and manipulation, family members who were aware of prior incidents, and professionals who had interacted with the family offered crucial perspectives. Their accounts corroborated the narrative of coercion, fear, and control that had dominated the household for years. The mother-in-law's participation, initially hesitant, became pivotal. Her acknowledgement of the secret and recognition of the resulting violence reinforced the credibility of my claims. Her testimony bridged the gap between private suffering and public accountability, highlighting how the husband's actions had created a ripple of consequences affecting multiple relationships. The husband's strategy relied heavily on discrediting me. He attempted to portray the assault as trivial, a misunderstanding, or an overreaction. He sought to manipulate the perception of the secret's revelation as the primary problem, rather than his violent response. Each attempt required careful rebuttal. Consistency in my account, corroborating evidence, and strategic legal presentation ensured that the truth remained clear. The pattern of manipulation, when juxtaposed with factual evidence, demonstrated the systemic nature of his control and aggression, leaving little room for doubt in the eyes of the court. Financial implications became intertwined with legal proceedings. The secret involved not only personal betrayal, but also financial deception that affected household assets. Using these facts strategically, my legal team argued for a fair division of property, highlighting the husband's mismanagement and the broader impact of his secrecy on family stability. Documentation of bank statements, property records, and historical financial correspondence substantiated these claims. This integration of financial evidence with the domestic violence case strengthened my position, demonstrating a multifaceted understanding of harm that encompassed both safety and economic stability. Daily life, while constrained by legal proceedings, gradually found a rhythm. Establishing routines in a new environment required patience. Children adapted to new schools, new social circles, and a drastically different home life. I managed daily responsibilities while attending to legal matters, therapy sessions, and rebuilding personal networks. Each day represented a balance of structure and flexibility, providing the children with stability while maintaining my own focus and emotional regulation. The act of rebuilding routines became a silent assertion of autonomy and control over circumstances that had once been dominated by fear. Emotionally, recovery was complex and ongoing. Waves of grief, anger, and relief came in unpredictable patterns. Therapy became an essential tool, offering strategies for managing trauma, processing betrayal, and developing resilience. The children's responses mirrored this complexity. Their questions, fears, and emotional reactions required careful navigation. Over time, moments of clarity and peace emerged. These periods allowed for reflection on the past, acknowledgement of the pain endured, and recognition of the courage required to survive and take decisive action. The husband's ongoing attempts at interference necessitated constant vigilance. He filed motions, made inquiries, and occasionally sent indirect communications. Each action required a measured response, balancing assertiveness with legal prudence. Protective measures were maintained, ensuring that any attempt to reassert control could be addressed promptly. The children's welfare remained the paramount concern. Every decision, every legal maneuver, was evaluated through the lens of safety and emotional well-being. This approach required discipline, foresight, and unwavering commitment to the principle that survival and stability took precedence over confrontation. As legal proceedings neared conclusion, the cumulative effect of documented evidence, witness testimony, and consistent legal advocacy became apparent. The assault case was validated, the restraining orders solidified, and the divorce proceedings reflected both the abuse and the consequences of secrecy. Custody arrangements prioritized the children's safety and emotional needs, and financial settlements accounted for both deception and harm. The resolution was not instantaneous, but it was definitive. The legal system, slowly but surely, affirmed the reality that had been lived in fear for a decade, translating private suffering into public recognition and formal accountability. Rebuilding life post-divorce required ongoing adaptation. Housing, while no longer temporary, still demanded investment, planning, and the establishment of new routines. Employment, finances, and social reintegration were areas that needed attention, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities. The process of reclaiming independence was gradual. Every successful negotiation, every decision made with foresight, and every step toward stability reinforced the resilience cultivated through adversity. Life, though scarred by past events, began to unfold with renewed possibility and cautious optimism. The revelation of the secret, initially a source of conflict and danger, ultimately became a cornerstone of liberation. The act of telling the mother-in-law, though catastrophic in immediate consequence, had catalyzed a sequence of events that ensured safety, accountability, and the dismantling of manipulative power. The narrative that had been suppressed for a decade was now visible, validated, and strategically applied to secure justice. The interplay between truth, violence, and legal action highlighted the complex moral landscape navigated over these years, where ethical imperatives and self-preservation intersected in profoundly challenging ways. Reflection on the decade-long journey revealed layers of irony, complexity, and growth. The secrecy maintained over 10 years, intended to protect relationships or avoid confrontation, had become a source of danger and entrapment. The violent response to truth underscored the unpredictability of human behavior and the necessity of protective measures. Yet the eventual outcome demonstrated that courage, preparation, and strategic action could transform vulnerability into agency. The experience reinforced the principle that survival sometimes requires confrontation, documentation, and a steadfast commitment to justice. The children, now adjusted to new routines and environments, represented both the motivation and the outcome of these efforts. Their well-being, security, and emotional development were central to every decision. Observing their resilience, adaptability, and gradual restoration of normalcy provided profound satisfaction and reinforced the purpose behind every legal, logistical, and emotional maneuver. Each milestone, from academic progress to social integration, symbolized recovery, empowerment, and the establishment of a life defined by choice rather than constraint. The first days after leaving my home were the hardest. The weight of 10 years pressed on my shoulders, and the reality of homelessness loomed over me in every waking moment. The driveway I had walked out of countless times, the rooms where laughter and arguments alike had echoed, were now entirely gone from my life. I had no possessions beyond what I could carry, and every step forward felt heavy with loss. Even with temporary housing, a small apartment provided by a local support network, I felt unmoored. The familiar surroundings, once a source of comfort, had been replaced with stark, impersonal walls and basic furnishings. I realized then that the fight for freedom had come with a cost far beyond what I could have anticipated. Adjusting to this new environment required constant vigilance. My children, who were old enough to understand some of what had happened, faced their own challenges. Their school routines had been disrupted, their social lives uprooted, and their sense of stability shaken. Each day required a careful balance of maintaining normalcy for them while managing my own emotional upheaval. Simple acts, like preparing meals or helping with homework, became anchors in the chaos. They reminded me of why I had chosen to act, why I had revealed the secret despite the personal cost. Every small victory, every smile that returned to their faces became a testament to resilience and an affirmation that the steps I had taken were necessary, no matter how devastating the consequences. Legal matters consumed my waking hours. The assault report, filed the moment I was safe, had initiated a chain of proceedings that now demanded constant attention. Court dates, filings, and consultations with attorneys became routine. I was forced to revisit the details of the choking incident repeatedly, recounting the fear, the pain, and the betrayal to strangers in official capacities. Every retelling, though emotionally draining, strengthened the case and reinforced the truth of my experience. The meticulous gathering of evidence, from medical reports and photographs to witness statements, was exhausting, yet essential. I realized that the legal system could only protect me if I provided a full and unassailable record of what had occurred. The divorce process intertwined with the assault case in ways that required constant strategy. My husband attempted to exploit the secret, claiming that my disclosure had provoked his reaction or that the revelations undermined his character. My attorneys guided me to respond not with anger but with precision. We presented the evidence methodically, showing the pattern of control, deceit, and violence that had defined our marriage long before the secret was revealed. Each motion, each hearing, became an opportunity to assert not only the truth of the assault, but also the broader context of emotional and psychological abuse. By keeping the focus on documented facts and observable behavior, we maintained credibility and authority in court. Witnesses played a crucial role in validating my claims. Friends who had witnessed subtle but consistent patterns of the husband's aggression, neighbors who had observed tension and conflict, and even the mother-in-law, who reluctantly acknowledged her son's deception, all contributed testimony that underscored the reality of the situation. Their statements added layers of corroboration, showing that the choking was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of intimidation and control. The mother-in-law's reluctant acknowledgement, though painful to navigate, was pivotal. Her confirmation of the secret and recognition of the harm it had caused validated my actions and positioned me not as the instigator, but as a victim seeking safety and accountability. Financial recovery was another complicated dimension of this act of liberation. The secret involved manipulation and deceit that had real financial consequences. Property, savings, and assets had been managed in ways that disadvantaged me, and the divorce proceedings required careful attention to ensure equitable division. My attorneys documented discrepancies, tracked financial records, and argued that the husband's concealment of critical information had harmed the household. By combining the assault evidence with financial records, we created a comprehensive portrayal of a marriage built on control, deception, and eventual violence. This holistic approach ensured that the resolution was not only protective but also just. Emotional recovery was equally critical. Therapy provided strategies to manage fear, grief, and anger. I learned to identify triggers, process trauma, and navigate interactions with my ex-husband when necessary. The children attended counseling sessions as well, helping them articulate their emotions and adjust to their new reality. Gradually, we established routines that fostered stability and safety. Mornings became predictable, homework was completed on schedule, and evenings included shared meals and conversations. These small acts of normalcy countered the chaos of the previous weeks and reinforced the sense that despite the upheaval, life could continue and even thrive in a new form. Public perception also required navigation. Friends, extended family, and acquaintances had varying levels of awareness and opinion about the situation. Some expressed support, while others remained judgmental or distant. Managing these relationships required diplomacy and resilience. It was essential to communicate clearly, maintain consistency in my account of events, and establish boundaries that protected my mental health. Each interaction became a test of assertiveness and clarity, ensuring that I could engage with the outside world without compromising the safety and stability I had fought to secure. The process of reclaiming personal agency unfolded gradually. Every decision, from selecting new housing to arranging school transportation, symbolized control over a life that had been dominated by secrecy and violence. Each step was a declaration that I would no longer live under threat, manipulation, or concealment. The act of revealing the secret, though catastrophic in immediate consequence, ultimately became the catalyst for this transformation. The sequence of events it triggered ensured that accountability was established, safety was enforced, and the patterns of control that had existed for a decade were dismantled. As court proceedings concluded, the final decisions reflected the cumulative impact of a decade of hardship. Protective orders were made permanent, custody arrangements prioritized the children's safety, and the divorce was finalized with terms that acknowledged both the abuse and the deception. The financial settlement, though modest compared to the lost decade, provided a foundation for rebuilding. More importantly, the legal resolutions affirmed the truth of my experience and ensured that the husband's ability to manipulate, intimidate, or control was formally curtailed. The courtroom, once a place of anxiety and fear, became a space of validation and closure. Rebuilding life required continued effort. The search for stable housing, employment, and community support demanded energy and determination. Slowly, routines solidified, social networks expanded, and the children adapted. Their resilience was remarkable, providing motivation and affirmation for every decision I made. Each step forward was a reinforcement of the principle that safety, truth, and autonomy must guide actions, even when the path is fraught with difficulty and personal loss. Reflection revealed the profound cost and the unexpected rewards of my actions. Revealing the secret had led to immediate catastrophe, including homelessness and the breakdown of familial relationships. Yet the long-term outcome provided protection, justice, and the foundation for a life rebuilt on honesty and autonomy. The paradox was striking. The act that had caused the greatest upheaval also secured the greatest liberation. It was a lesson in courage, the complexity of human behavior, and the necessity of confronting deception and abuse, no matter the cost. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to reveal my husband's secret to his mother after 10 years, because this decision didn't just end my marriage, it cost me my home, turned my former in-laws against me, and left me starting over with nothing. I need to know your opinion.